Being rich and happy is wealth, the happiness element. And being somewhat rich, $100,000, $200,000 and happy is good.
Welcome to Flip Your Script, the podcast about life's critical turning points and how people find the inspiration and motivation to move forward and rewrite their unique stories. Flip Your Script is produced by Media Minefield, a public relations firm passionate about the power of sharing stories. Specializing in earned and social media, Media Minefield helps clients take control of their unique story and message. The show is hosted by Christy Peel, founder and CEO of Media Minefield, who flipped her script from an Emmy-winning journalist to a successful entrepreneur and speaker.
Money is one of those topics that for most people is taboo. Well, not today. We're going to talk money, myths, and purpose with a man who influenced an entire generation to flip their financial scripts. Dr. Bill Danko is the New York Times bestselling co-author of The Millionaire Next Door and Richer Than a Millionaire, A Pathway to True Prosperity. He lives in upstate New York with his wife and is the proud father of 3 and grandfather of 5. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
You know, as someone who was finishing college, getting married in the 90s when your book, the first book came out, it was what everyone was talking about it. I remember my mother-in-law talking about Millionaires Drive Tauruses and all these little details from that book. And since I knew I was going to have you on, I've shared with a few people that you were going to be on. And I've gotten everything from someone in their 30s who said, I just read that book 2 years ago, to someone in their 50s who said, that book changed how I think about money. You've had such an influence on so many people. And yet, at the end of the day, you're a researcher. That wasn't your intention.
No, that's exactly right. It all goes back to 1973. I was a student of Tom Stanley's at the university, and I was a pretty good student, and he invited me to participate in his very first study of the affluent market. And that's really the roots of rock and roll, so to speak. And he encouraged me to go get a PhD, which I did, and at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, RPI for short, in the Lally School of Management. And I really learned a lot about research through my graduate program, of course. But for the next 20 years, from 1973 to about 1993, Tom and I did a number of academic studies and consulting studies together. But he called me up in 1993 and said, Bill, here's a concept. We call it big hat, no cattle. It's about who has the illusion of wealth versus those who really have the substance of wealth. So that was the basic framework. So in 1996, the book was published. And but before that, the editor said, look, boys, nobody's going to buy a book about cattle. Why don't we call it something like The Millionaire Next Door? And that's really the editor, proposed that, and we agreed. And look, if you have a book title that somebody's going to pick it up off the bookshelf, bring it to the cash register, that's half the battle, isn't it?
Absolutely. So you have this extensive research, and like many academics, I suspect, you start with a hypothesis, you do the research, and then you prove it out. So when you started researching and really taking a deep dive on the affluent, what did you think you were going to find? And then what most surprised you about what you actually found?
Yeah, it was really data-driven. We had what is called convergent validity. We had so many different data sources, IRS data, census data, our own survey data, our own focus groups, and our own personal interviews. And one of the things in a consulting study we found curious, that there were many affluent people living in what we called industrial strength neighborhoods. They didn't dress the part, they didn't drive the part. You say, well, how in the world could they have any money? Well, They were what we call the blue collar millionaires. They were the plumbers, plumbing contractors, carpenters. They may own a construction company. And so therefore they drove a pickup truck out of necessity. They didn't have to buy fancy suits, and they could live in a neighborhood with friends that they liked without having to display any wealth. And then on the other hand, we look at some neighborhoods with the fancy cars and the swimming pools at the 10,000 square foot mansions. And we found that many of these people are hopelessly in debt, wall-to-wall mortgages, leased cars, lots of student loan payments to make. And so they looked really good, but they had no substance. That's where the big hat, no cattle comes in. Now, not everybody is like that, of course. Look, one of the key things is for every very well-off person who can afford one of the luxury items I just described, there are 4 to 5 non-wealthy people buying the same item because they want to look wealthy. So you can either be wealthy or look wealthy. And there's a lot of, personal satisfaction in being wealthy and not having to display it.
So it's the keeping up with the Joneses that's proven out.
Yeah. And this is one of the problems. I mean, look, I love America, but we have such a consumption-oriented society that I don't think is healthy for the long run, because we always want to get bigger, faster, better. I mean, for example, in a recent Wall Street Journal, there was an advertisement for used cars, used luxury cars. And for example, you can buy a 2019 Mercedes S560 4MATIC, top of the line Mercedes, original manufacturer's price, $114,000, but you can buy it 2 years old with 29,000 miles for $83,900. And what that is a 26% savings. If you let somebody else give you the gift of early depreciation, you can still drive luxury without having to spend the premium for that depreciation.
So you're doing this research in the 70s, 80s, book comes out in the 90s, as you're having children, buying a home, becoming, an adult, and you're doing all of these things while you're also doing the research. How did it change how you think about money?
Well, I never had money. And so this was perfect, because this was a typical graduate assistant role that I had of, oh boy, another research project. You're right. I have, married, got the kids, trying to get tenure at university by doing straight academic studies. And then when Tom called me up, it was hard to say no, because he has been such a good mentor over the years. And so, well, let's do it. In my oceans of free time, just make it happen. And it was really wonderful. So it was from 93 to 96. And one of the things I was doing a course in Taiwan in the summers from 1985 to 1994. And I just could not keep up with that while doing the research. So I stopped my obligation with Taiwan, even though it was great to take that very long commute to get to Taiwan. But it's the research opportunity was more important than the teaching opportunity at the time, going back to Taiwan over the summers anyway.
So when you are purchasing things in the 90s and since you have all this data-driven information, do you think about the tools that you learned from other people in the research and change how you spend money and what you teach your kids to? Or did you always have that sense that, we don't need to be putting in a swimming pool on credit when we can go to the community pool for free?
Yeah. Look, I had a pretty modest upbringing, largely because my father died when I was 5 years old. He was 38, and my widowed mother never remarried. But the point is, I never knew kids took vacations until I was about 10 years old. I mean, I just didn't know that. It just was not part of the lifestyle. And that was fine. You don't need a lot of material things. And to this day, in the very house that I'm in right now, I still do not have cable television. Never needed it. I have an internet connection, yes, but not cable.
And you talked about your parents, and you sent me some information which I looked at. And though your father passed away when you were a little boy, his impact and your mother's impact have influenced you through today. And I suspect you would say generationally impacted your grandchildren, that sort of thing. But tell me about your parents and their mindset and how they gave back, because you've given back because they taught you to give back and they modeled that.
It probably even goes back before my parents. My grandparents came from Lithuania and Poland in the early 1900s, not speaking a word of English. But the lesson was in the household, you will integrate yourself, you will become part of the system. And so we never spoke Lithuanian or Polish at home. I wish we did, but we didn't. And my mother always said, Bill, stay in school. And I took her literally, all the way right through the PhD program and then getting a university position. So yeah, my mother really had a huge influence in that sense, carrying on the tradition of be the best you can be, get the education, and be something. Be part of the system. Be a contributor.
Be a contributor, not a taker.
Exactly. A giver, not a taker. That's right. And that's so important, especially, in the empirical research on the new book, but we can get to that in a moment, about how givers are really far more happy than those who are takers.
Which is no surprise. And yet the messages that are fed, especially to children, and then that impacts how they think as adults, is you need stuff and you need name brand stuff. And social media has really impacted that, and what maybe kids in a rural environment who 40 years ago couldn't see what rich urban kids were doing, and now they can and think, gosh, I gotta do that too. that helps define me. Have you seen in research you've done more recently from the 90s to now and social media and the connectedness that we all have, has that changed how we think, or has it made us more in debt?
Yeah, we're more in debt. We're consumers on steroids right now. Even with student debt, where you look at some of the inside problems at universities, which are just businesses after all, and they're willing to take your tuition money or whatever money you can give them. And sometimes the education is not very useful in helping you with your career. Sometimes it is very valuable. There's no question. I'm not denigrating schools. I'm just saying what's wrong with a trade school? What's wrong with being a carpenter? What's wrong with actually having a physical working with your hands that has nothing to do with the university or college life? There's nothing wrong with any of that, but we've de-emphasized it in our society. That is a real problem.
It's fascinating to hear a PhD say that, because you hear people say that, but to hear a true academic, someone who has spent their entire career in higher education, to say, you know what, it's not for everybody.
I spent 33 years as a professor of marketing at the university at Albany, State University of New York. And it was wonderful. It really was. But then you realize, wait a minute, life is short. I got to do some other things that I want to do and not be confined to 15-week semesters and teaching the same material, although it's important material. Of course it's important. It's my material. But I wanted to do other things. And that was part of the genesis of the new research on Richer Than a Millionaire that I did with my colleague, Rich Van Ness.
So before we get to that, because I'm really, really interested in it, have you, for example, ever purchased a lottery ticket?
I have.
You have?
I have.
Because it's fun, or because you thought you could get rich quick?
Oh, no. Because it's fun.
Okay.
It's over coffee with friends. Sometimes we win. The winner has to buy.
So it's a recreation. So
it is.
That's the other thing that I think has happened in society. And this is just pure. not data driven, just me being a consumer of information, that people have seen folks win the lottery. They've seen folks start a business in the basement and IPO it and become billionaires. And people think, okay, I can, as an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, do something fast and make a lot of money and never have to worry about money again.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. There's a real allure to that. I mean, but you can get so reckless when you have instant wealth because you have no idea how to manage it. The idea of the Millionaires Next Door, it tends to be an organic growth based on frugality, based on this is some way I can add value to the marketplace, and people will buy what I'm making or the service that I'm offering. And so therefore there's a value proposition. You pay for it, you make money. Skilled surgeons obviously make money, architects make money, but so do skilled plumbers and skilled carpenters. Finnish carpenters especially can make a lot of money doing what they do because they have this natural talent that is in demand.
And if someone gets into plumbing, for example, because they love it, because they love to work with their hands, because they love to, work and get dirty and fix something and then move to the next thing, I suspect very few people get into plumbing to die rich. But there are people who get into other elements of industry for the purpose of getting very wealthy. And even that mindset must change when you're in it because you love it and you feel like this is what you're put on this earth to do, as opposed to, I want to get rich.
Yeah. And boy, what a miserable life that would be, because you have no upper limit, do you? I want to be rich, and how much is enough? In fact, part of the research, we look at how much is enough. And we look at what is your current net worth and what do you think you need in order to feel rich? Briefly, it's in graphical form in the book, but briefly, if you have currently $500,000 net worth, to feel rich, you say you need $2.5 million. Well, if you have $2.5 million, you think you need $5 million. If you have $5 million, you think you need $8 million. Now, look, if you have $1.2 million, you're in the top 10% of all the net worth households in the United States. 1.2 million total net worth. If you have about $11 million right now, you're a 1%er. Now, you look at, the Warren Buffetts of the world and other very wealthy billionaires. I mean, they're in the stratosphere. They're, the 1/100th of 1% category. But being an ordinary millionaire, being in the top 10% or top 8%, is actually quite good. In fact, it would really be useful for everybody to get a worldwide perspective as how wealthy Americans really are. The median net worth in the United States is $120,000 right now. Half above, half below. If you have a net worth of greater than 120,000, you're in the upper half. And people say, oh my goodness, how can I possibly live on that amount? I can't retire. Well, maybe you can't, but the point is you're doing better than the average bear with that 120,000 as the threshold, getting you to the upper half. So when you're just have this mindset of I could never have enough, you're going to be on an economic treadmill and you'll be wearing yourself out.
Well, and it's mindset of abundance. I have this, or you can look at it as I don't have this. And depending upon where you put your energy is where you put your brain, which is where you put your money, which is where you put your happiness and where you find joy, right?
Yeah. And you know what? And there's even a very practical element to this. I have a number of friends in law enforcement. And when I ask them, what kind of advice would you give somebody to avoid being victimized? And they say, easy, keep a low profile. If you have gold jewelry and a luxury car that's brand new and you live in a fancy neighborhood, well, if you're a bad person and you want to victimize somebody, you're going to go after somebody who's driving a beat up pickup truck or somebody who's driving a brand new, shiny luxury car with a lot of bling associated with it. So it just makes a lot of sense in terms of personal safety. Because look, when you pursue your career, especially these people who are the millionaires next door, they have this organic growth and they really buy into this mantra from the Nobel laureate Franco Modigliani, who in 1985 won the Nobel Prize in Economics, where he encapsulated his research about the life cycle of money simply this way. When you're young, you work for money, and when you're old, money works for you, which means you have to be a saver and an investor and let compounding work for you. And so one day you could actually retire when your hands no longer will allow you to do your whatever trade you're in. Even a dentist has to retire. Could you imagine an arthritic dentist saying, I can't afford to retire? My goodness, that's it'd be terrible.
No, thank you.
So enjoy your good health while you have it. And that's, look, make hay while the sun shines, right? That's you don't need a Nobel Prize for that one.
So what about the people, Bill, that will say, you know what, it's kind of sad when I read a story in the newspaper about the teacher, the waitress, the plumber who died living with no cable, living with never going on a vacation and $3 million in the bank. Why didn't they just enjoy life a little more? They could have enjoyed life a little. So what do you say to that?
But they did enjoy. They knew that they could do what they wanted to do if they wanted to do it. And that's really a key element. Look, there are some people who are so stressed out on this economic treadmill, they can't afford to retire. They got to keep working. They're in a cage. As long as they keep working, they can support this lifestyle. When you're this, the millionaire who dies wealthy, which, is not necessarily a good thing. You should perhaps have a charitable bequest in your will instead of just letting, or have a will, that's for sure, as opposed to letting the government take your money. When you look at the things you can do with your money, one, okay, I'm going to spend more on myself. Well, you're not going to do that if you're frugal. I'll give it to my kids. Oh, that's a great idea. Let's deaden their senses. Let's give them a sense of entitlement, right? That's not going to be useful. Let's die with an estate tax bill. Well, I don't want to give the government the money I just earned. Or the last thing you can do, be charitable, right? Get that tax deduction, benefit other people in society. It just makes so much more sense to have that charity orientation as opposed to the me orientation. I need more for myself. I need more for my family. Look, you don't want your family to be destitute, but at the same, look, Warren Buffett really had a great idea here. He said, give your children enough money so that they can do anything, but not so much they can do nothing.
Yes, get them out of your basement, right? And then and then make them hungry enough to work. We put something in our will. Our oldest son is 18, and if God forbid something would happen to both my husband and I, the way that the children, we have another son, a teenager, the way that they could get money out up until a certain age is that they would have to present their W-2 to the person in charge of our money then at that point, and we would match it. The trust would match it. Because again, you don't giving millions of dollars to a 20-year-old we've seen this. It isn't excellent. And to your point, when there are athletes or people that at a young age make a lot of money, we see them destitute later in life, not because they didn't make a lot of money, but because they spent more.
Exactly. You have to develop the mindset of, I don't need all this extra stuff. Let me be an investor instead of a spender. The time value of money is so critical. What we have to do is look at how many compounding opportunities we can have. and just let your money go on autopilot. There'll be ups and downs in your investments. I understand that. But in the long run, if you believe in America, and I do, it's a winning place to be. In fact, most migrants come here because they know this is a winning environment in the United States.
But you
And
have
I
to play the
understand
long game. You play the
the
long game.
long game. Absolutely, the long game.
So what I think is interesting about your more recent book is that you took the research and all the things that you've seen, and then you really, and this is my own words, perhaps I'm wrong and you can correct me, you really put it to like, why? What's the purpose of the money? What's the reason that you have the money? And it, to me, goes from lifestyle to legacy.
Yeah. In 1996, when Millionaire Next Door came out, it was the same year my mother had a major stroke. Now, why am I telling you this? She was the primary caregiver to my quadriplegic brother. So guess what I inherited? And I don't mean that in a negative way, but I inherited my brother, and I was getting enough royalties and had the ability to buy him a house, keep him out of a nursing home. And it's, in fact, I still have the house, and I'm renting it out now to somebody who, an older couple that really needs a one floor house with, because they have limited mobility. But here's the issue. For 20 years, I was the weekend aide, or most weekends, for my brother, because it's so hard to get a weekend aide. So I am the aide. And you look at somebody who can't even scratch his nose. And here I am, a New York Times bestseller, bon vivant, PhD, making the money, and dealing with my brother who, had a heart of gold, but very limited in what he could do. So that's when I started thinking about, with my colleague, Rich Van Ness, who lives near me in upstate New York, this idea of what's money all about? What kind of message do we want to give our children and our grandchildren? Both of us collectively probably had 20,000 students in college and university instruction. We're old guys. What can I say? In earlier years, when you get lecture centers, with 500 of your closest friends, you learn something about presentation skills, but you also really get to understand what students are thinking, what their values are. And we were inspired then with office hours, and students had more problems than just the marketing research issue or the marketing strategy issue. They had problems with, their parents are getting divorced. I have a sick parent who's going to die. There's all sorts of personal issues going on in the background with a lot of students. Well, everybody has a problem, everybody. And it all depends how tough the problem is and how it manifests. And so we started thinking about, well, look, what do we want for our own kids and certainly our students? And that's how we did this Richer Than a Millionaire. That was especially inspired by Benjamin Franklin, who in an essay in 1758 wrote The Way to Wealth. It's a 3,500 word essay. And he says, look, no matter how industrious and frugal and prudent you may be, it's all blasted without a blessing from heaven. And you must also be charitable to those who are in need, because you have so much that they can benefit from. So what Franklin was saying is, look, the way to wealth is, here's how you do the physical wealth, and what we talk about in Millionaire Next Door in the first half of the Richer Than a Millionaire. But to have the real wealth, you must also be charitable to others. And there's a lot to be said about that. And that's really the basis of the work. And we also incorporate a psychological scale called subjective well-being. It's based, in the psychology literature by Professor Ed Diener, who developed it in the 1980s. And he's used it worldwide, and he put it in the public domain. And we use that scale where we look at those who score above a certain threshold are considered well-adjusted and happy. Those who score beyond or below that threshold are considered disgruntled. And what we find is about 80% of the wealthy and near wealthy are pretty well adjusted. And those who are disgruntled, the maladjusted, have distinct differences in the way they view money. And what we find is those who are well adjusted truly are charitable. They give their time and their money to a greater extent to charity than those who can't have enough. They are at peace with their soul. And that's priceless right there. Being at peace with your soul, knowing you've done what you can do and not having any guilt. It's incredible that, so the pathway is, you have this money, now give it away.
So how would you define wealth? Is it dollars and cents? Is it happiness? How do you define true wealth?
Yeah. Earlier, we talked about those people who can't get enough, just money is their God. Being rich and happy is wealth, the happiness element. And being somewhat rich, $100,000, $200,000 and happy is good. Because we find in our research, there are people who have the modest net worth, but are very happy with their lot in life. And they can be richer than a millionaire because there are millionaires who are miserable.
So it's so interesting, the concept that money isn't the key to happiness. It's money plus happiness, giving back. And to be happy is about giving to other people and valuing things besides just your bank account. And when you have enough, then you have the capability to give to other people. But all of that is mindset, because you can never have enough. You can always compare to someone else. There's always someone with more money, with more handbags, luxury cars, swimming pools, properties, like whatever it is, there's always someone else with more. So it's, how do I define for your own self what is enough, and then how to fill in the happiness quotient, which is about helping other people.
Yeah. And, you even go back to the biblical story of the widow's mite. She had very little to give, but she gave what she had. And others would say, well, look how little she gives, but she gave what she had, as opposed to those who are saying, well, I give more, but that's only a fraction of what I have. So who's really happier? Those who give all are really the happiest.
And she was deeply blessed for that. Deeply blessed.
Yeah. The idea of being charitable is not just Benjamin Franklin's idea or Bill Danko's idea. When you look at Judaism in the book of Isaiah, we have the idea of, giving your coat to those who have none, feeding the hungry. And Christianity, you look at Matthew 25, that which you've done to the least of these, you've done unto me, says Christ, giving. In Islam, one of the pillars of Islam is almsgiving. And in the Hindu tradition as well, they have this idea of being charitable to those in need. Every religion, as a cornerstone, says you must be a giver. So Franklin may be more of a secularist than anything, but he wasn't formal religion, but certainly he was a believer in so-called higher power, which a deist, I think he was actually defined as. But even those who are deists and those with formal religion, the idea of being a giver is really necessary, because I can't imagine a religion that's going to make you miserable by doing what you have to do. There should be some joy in it. And it turns out there is. We have the empirical proof.
It's interesting that you brought up religion, because I do think that in some circles, poverty is assumed to be the best pathway, and the right, you can measure your religiosity based on how little you have. And I remember, true story, I talk about it sometimes, not very much, but when my business started taking off, there was one point where it was a couple of years in, I had a very significant check. It was the first really big kind of exclusive deal I had, and it came with an upfront payment. And I started the business in my church basement to help other people. So the concept of making a lot of money or wasn't part of why I started it at all. So I have this big check in my purse, and I went to meet with my pastor, and I was crying because I said, I don't think this is right. I'm making a lot of money here, and I didn't start it for that. And shouldn't I be? I don't understand. I was so confused. And he stopped me down. And I've shared this with a lot of young entrepreneurs, or especially women, I think struggle with this perhaps more than men, where, gosh, it's a worthiness thing. It's something else. It's not really about the money. But he said, you have to stop that because you now can help other people. Some people are gifted to make money, and some people are gifted to go do the charitable work, but nobody's doing any charitable work without someone else funding it. So you go make more money and help more people, and then that's your gift back. And that was such a mind change for me. And there is so much happiness in giving back, but giving back with joy, because nobody wants to see, I have to write the check. I have to. Well, that's not joyful giving at all.
No, you're absolutely right. And you're absolutely right on the point of how can you help people in a material world if you don't have money? If you have your time, that's good. Be a volunteer. But we live in a material world where people need to eat, need shelter, need clothing, and being a giver to help those. One of my favorite charities is the city mission. I mean, you talk about people who are down on their luck for whatever reason, you can make a real impact with your city mission and feed the poor.
So if there's one thing your students, your grandchildren can take from you about money, what's the one thing?
Don't make it a false god. We have worshiped money and power in this culture. And the reality is you've got to get in touch with your mortality, saying, wait a minute, do I have enough? Yeah, I have enough. And everybody can answer that question on their own. You'll have to ask yourself, what difference does an incremental dollar make in my life? Now, look, if you're deeply in debt with a lot of student loans and a big mortgage, well, maybe you got to rethink the education you bought and the house that you want to live in and the car you want to drive. You don't have to do it. Those are all discretionary things. And you bring on this debt yourself because there was some societal pressure to saying, I got to have this. You don't have to have anything. As long as you have, some ability to add value, you can make a living. In fact, Benjamin Franklin said, your real treasure is in how you interact with others in society. You have a trade, you have a skill that somebody would want to buy. So I buy that. I agree.
Figure out what it is. Go out, do it.
Exactly. You have to figure it out, right? In the appendix of Millionaire Next Door, I think there's 150 job titles of people we've interviewed over the years. And they go, architects and attorneys, but we also have, the plumbers, the tradespeople, the franchise owners, the mobile park owners. There's all sorts of ways that people have made their money. There is no one answer.
So the last question, because I know we could talk for a long time, and it's so interesting because you have this breadth of knowledge and wisdom, and you've seen so many different things, and it hasn't changed you. And that's so unusual, I think, that people have what they're rooted in and grounded in, and whether they add New York Times bestselling author to them or whether they add PhD, whatever it might be, that you don't change who you are at the core, and you use that information to help other people, which is what your whole life has been.
Yeah. In my younger days, I used to be a sinner. I used to drive a Mercedes.
A sinner. Come on, Mercedes. They're not sinners.
Okay. I drive a Subaru now, but when I was taking care of my brother, I bought a wheelchair van. And man, I got the best parking spots. So it's, you do what you got to do. The Subaru Outback is perfect now, and especially in this northern New York climate. And I suppose where you are too, a Subaru is appropriate.
I know
So
a
yeah,
lot of people who drive Subarus. Very wonderful people.
yeah. One of the things in teaching marketing research, we talked about exogenous and endogenous variables. Exogenous variables are the things that exist out there, like the economy, that you can't control, but you better understand. And the endogenous, those variables that you can control, are things like, your product, your placement, your pricing, your promotional activity. Which brings me to when I think about how we learned marketing from a school of business perspective, and then reflecting on what we call the Serenity Prayer by Reinhold Niebuhr. And this is what really focused me. The Serenity Prayer is, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. A short prayer. We have so many people saying, I don't know what I can control. I don't know why these things are happening to me. Well, a lot of things you don't know. But the things you can change, you can change. You can exercise more. You can quit smoking. You can quit drinking. You can get more productive. You can get the right kind of education. These are the things you can control. So why not? And know the difference, what you can and cannot.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so profound and so simple.
And it's right out of a school of business, but they never talk about God and serenity. We talk about endogenous and exogenous variables. But this is exactly what it's all about in life, isn't it? Things you can change and things you can't.
Knowing the difference.
And knowing the difference and accepting what you can't change. And live with it. Deal with it.
And what's next for you, Bill? What's the next thing you're going to do?
The next thing is, there's more research on this very topic, but more immediately, since it's such a beautiful day today, I'm going to do some yard work. Yes, I do my own yard work. I don't belong to a gym.
Well, and I'm sure for all the neighbors and all the people who drive by and walk by, they're grateful that you're doing that work because you're blessing them.
That's right. They say, who is this guy who keeps the low profile, who drives a Subaru, who can do what he wants to do when he wants to do it? It's a good feeling to have.
That's a life well lived.
I'm doing the best I can. And so far, the grandkids are still listening to me too. So that's good.
Yeah, that's a gift for sure.
Yeah.
Well, if I could sum up all the different things that we learned from Bill today and his perspectives, find your purpose for two reasons. Find your purpose so you can make money, and find your purpose so that you can help other people. My hope is Bill's story empowers you to believe you're capable of more than you think, to discover motivation, to uncover inspiration, and to find the strength to turn the page.
Thank you for listening to Flip Your Script, hosted by Christy Peel and produced by Media Minefield. If you like our message, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also check out flipyourscriptpodcast.com for pictures, resources mentioned in the show, and information about our other great episodes.